forth. And we've been covering chapter 12 and chapter 14 of Revelation. And as we've mentioned to you time and time again, it is very, very important, especially in these two chapters, understanding that Revelation is not a chronological book. It is a cyclical book. And this is where everybody gets tripped up, in the modern interpreters at least. So many people that go more toward a dispensational viewpoint, they have a linear view or a chronological view of the book that enables them to reach a certain conclusion. The same with the concept of take it as literal as you can unless otherwise noted. That's something people say a lot. Well, the thing is, in the beginning of the book, he tells you it's a sign book. Okay? For example, like when John, in chapter 15, when we get there, you see, I saw another sign in heaven. He says it straight up. In the first chapter, the things which God is signifying. So, with that in mind, Revelation is the most Old Testament book in the New. Therefore, you have to have a strong familiarity with what? To grasp some of the meanings or the signs. The Old Testament prophets especially. Okay? And when you get into all these visions, like we talked about, scorpions and serpents and angels and stars and dragons and women and angels and all these things, it's almost self-interpretive to a degree. We can't know everything. I get that. I mean, my. I mean, I waffle back and forth all the time in chapter 20 with the 1,000-year reign, you know, and currently I'm more on the spiritual side. But there's times, for example, the earliest church, they had what they call a historic premillennial view. As early as Justin Martyr and so forth, they all kind of thought about a millennial kingdom to a degree, but they weren't at all in the dispensational realm. That doctrine didn't show up till like the mid-1800s and stuff. The idea about this separate rapture and stuff like that. So our goal is to stick with Revelation above all else, compare with the Old Testament prophets, see where it takes us, not be stressed about anything, to enjoy the journey, right? And take all these points of views into consideration the best we can. But again, I like to really rely on the book itself for how it guides us. And the case in point would be when we get to chapter 12, we saw, if you look on your notes on page 1, it says the heavenly picture. So in 12 and 13, I think they're kind of one unit. 12 is the heavenly picture. We were brought back to heaven, but this time to see the source of all evil, if you remember. In one fell swoop, we had an A to Z vision of the dragon, his rebellion, the people of God, their protection, and the dragon's insane rage and blindness against all things of God. We saw that. It was a beautiful past, present, and future concept. And that's the other thing. I'll just put up here real quick. I know these are complicated charts and stuff like that. Past, present, future. This, to me, is the umbrella that the book looks through. And this is all the history of the world. Okay? And I think that's how the prophets wrote, too. When you look, for example, Isaiah 53, he talks about past, present, and future of the suffering Messiah all in one. You know? When we get to chapter 17, for example, in Revelation, Babylon is fallen. Well, that didn't happen yet. But it's as good as done because here it comes, you see. And so in chapter 12, you have past, present, and future. The dragon's rebellion. We looked at that in Isaiah and Ezekiel. Jesus himself said in Luke 10, he saw Satan like lightning fall from heaven. I mean, this is comparative Bible study. We can be saved and at least comfortable in how we view this, okay? The woman who had the 12 stars on the moon, we saw that was the true Israel of God for all time. Old covenant, we looked at Jacob and from Genesis, where Jacob and Sarah were called the sun and moon. The stars were the 12 tribes, right? And then it goes into the new covenant because it says these people are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb and the testimony of their word. That man-child was caught up to heaven. I mean, this is all happening simultaneous. Past, present, and future, simultaneous. Okay? And then in chapter 13, we have the earthly picture of evil. He was a dragon in heaven. He's manifested as a beast on earth, okay? And last week, we got into an extensive comparison with Daniel chapter 7. Thanks, Deb. I thought you were going to pass. Oh, we got one left? Woo! Okay, we got one left. Did you get one? Oh, Link has a servant's heart. You don't have any notes. I have one copy left. It's my master copy, though. So you have in chapter 13 this earthly manifestation of the beast on earth. And we looked at Daniel extensively, okay? So let's take a look on the notes here if we can. We began showing the issue of the 7 crowns and 10 horns. And we talked about the earthly emphasis with the 10 horns. Chapter 17 gives you a little bit more insight, calls them 10 kings. But we didn't go there quite yet because we wanted to let Revelation go at its own pace, okay? So many have jumped to 17 to try to make this exclusively Rome, as we've talked about. But the thing is, the book doesn't do that. And I think the reason is because it wants to maintain this past, present, and future concept at all times. So we can't just limit it to Rome, because in our day, and through the years, as we'll see when we get to the mark, there was plenty of world-dominating regimes whereby the Christian was finding it hard to buy or sell or even worship. In John's day especially, it was true. Roman emperor worship, they were being martyred left and right. I mean, it has to have application to John's day as well. So to only make it future and some tribulation is also a mistake because of the big picture view of the book, okay? I think the beauty of the Word of God is no matter the day and age, it's relevant to who we are and where we are, okay? And that's a matter of just comparing the verses and seeing it, okay? Now let's just, if we can, by way of memory, we want to get into this issue of the mark and this beast that was and is not and all that. But in Daniel 7, we looked at that comparatively last week, and he talked about a beast too, right? And what did that beast have? Do you remember? By way of memory? I mean, we can go there if you wish, but what's that? Yeah, it had all 4 of those beasts there, didn't it? Lion, bear, leopard, and a 4th beast rose up. And this has been Daniel 7. And then he talked about this last beast that was exceeding dreadful. And how was that beast destroyed? Do you remember? In Daniel. He said, and then one like the Son of Man came. Who's the Son of Man? The Lord Jesus Christ. And in flaming fire, he devoured that beast. And all he stood for. And then who was the kingdom given to after that? Do you remember? The saints of God. That's us. This is in Daniel 7. And it was almost verbatim to chapter 13. So let's take a look at Revelation 13. Now remember, Daniel was told to seal up the vision. And Revelation, the reason why it's called Revelation, because it's revealing. Don't seal it up. Let it be known. Okay? So when we pick this up in chapter 13, verse 1, let's take a look-see here. Okay? Someone read verses 1 through 5. Okay, so the dragon and the beast are looked at as one and the same. We'll see this. Now, you can call it whatever you will, describe it. We've seen in Revelation, they use terms continually what? Interchangeably, changeably. So the dragon gave all of his power to the beast. He always does. Okay? Whatever system is in domination on planet Earth at the time, the dragon is back of that. In Rome in John's day, it was incredible system. I mean, you talk about, they called it Pax Romana back in the day. Roman peace. They ruled the world and kept all the scallywags under control, so to say. The road systems, this and that. Okay. It was a world kingdom. Okay? Just like in the Babylonian days, when Daniel wrote, he was in Babylon. And in Revelation, it's New Jerusalem versus who? Babylon. Babylon, therefore, is a picture of the world system. So it makes sense that this beast, whatever this is, rises up. And notice the leopard, bear, and a lion from Daniel 7. All the kingdoms of the world, all human history now culminates in this situation. Okay? And this beast has power, and he is over all, insomuch as that, look what he does in verse 6 and following. He opened his mouth in blasphemy, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints. Same language as Daniel. To overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell on earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If any man hear, let him hear. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity, and so forth. Okay? So we have this identical situation to Daniel where the saints were being hard-pressed by this beast. But the thing is, will this beast succeed? No, it will not. Okay? Because in the end, the Son of Man comes and wipes this beast out. And we're going to get into this in just a little bit. And then the kingdom is given to us. This is the meaning of Revelation 11 and 14, 6. The second coming happens 4 or 5 times in Revelation. It cycles around. Now are the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. That's chapter 11. And that was before 12 and 13. You see? It's cyclical. Keeps coming back around. Keeps coming back around. Okay? Now this is important because of the last days concept. Yes? Yeah. I'm not sure I would say that, but I think that's just a localized beef, so to say. I think that there's a lot of things I think about that, but I don't think, let me just say it this way. Revelation is not written in a newspaper headline prophecy kind of way. I don't think it's relevant. I really don't. That's my opinion. I think the mistake people have made is, not that you did, you just had a question, I understand. But the mistake people make is that Revelation has become, because of modern interpretations, newspaper headline theology. And this was written 2,000 years ago, and it had to have some relevance to the readers of John's day. They just didn't write this for someone 2,000 years later to figure it out. These are sound biblical principles that anybody familiar with the Old Testament would know how it's being applied. So in John's day, it's obvious this beast is Rome. It was clear. But you keep going on in human history, and it can be another thing, right? And now this is the importance of this head that was wounded and rises up again. Okay? Now let me just say this here. The last days, this is important because we've taught over and over. When did the last days begin? Yeah, essentially the last days began with the ministry of the Lord Jesus, who, when he defeated death, was rose again from the dead. He done got rosed. That's like in the morning I say, I got to get woke, man. So he got rosed from the dead, okay? And then the Bible calls this the last days. The last days aren't in the future. We've been in them from God's prophetic standpoint. The great text on this is Acts 2, of course. I say it over and over. When Peter first, in the last days, God will pour out of his Spirit. Your young men, your women, they're all parts. We're all equal now, see? And then the Lord Jesus comes back. That's in 4 verses in Acts 2. He covers 2,000 years at least of history. Why that's important is because of this beast that dies, but he comes again. Okay? And that's important because when you look at various interpretations, it can really apply to various times of human history. Okay? Let me show you what I mean as we go on. Okay? So these kingdoms of Daniel, this leopard, lion, bear, that was, we talked about that last week. You had Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And Rome took us into the last days. Pagan Rome. That was the main force against the church for at least 300 years. And that's why many have likened those 10 horns to the 10 Roman emperors. And that may be applicable to some degree, but I think it kind of goes beyond that also. Okay? So let's pick it up here today in, let's do a little study and research. Are you ready? You guys ready to dig in? So we want to find out, the first thing we want to find out, we could jump to the mark if you want first, but we got to find out who this, in verse 3 here of chapter 13, it says, I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death. Now that's one of the dragon's head. How many heads did he have? 7. And which 7 in the Bible? What is that? I mean, it's complete, perfect. So it's perfect evil. That's what he's saying. 7 heads. 10 also is completeness. It's a picture of worldly power and authority. Okay? So 7 heads, 10 horns. And one of these heads was wounded to death. And his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, which gave power to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who's like unto the beast? Who's able to make war with him? So it's one and the same, okay? The dragon, the beast, whatever you want to call it. We're going to read about a false prophet here in just a few minutes, okay? So the dragon gave power to the beast. He always does. This is page 2 of your notes. As they are one and the same, the one being the earthly manifestation of what is in heaven. Now, if you remember in chapter 9 says an army came out of the bottomless pit. But we're about to see in chapter 17, he says, the beast came out of the bottomless pit. So was it an army or was it the beast? The answer is yes. You see, it's all facets of the diamond, okay? And these descriptions are used interchangeably. For example, look at verse 11 here below. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as the dragon. So they're all on the same team. It's an unholy trinity, so to say. You see? Okay? All right, so now, where we are here is this beast had a head which was wounded to death, and it was healed, and then the whole world wondered after the beast. So here's what we need to take a look at chapter 17. Now we're allowed to go there to get a little bit of a grip on what's going on, okay? So let's go over to chapter 17, okay? And as we do that, I'm going to go behind my magic Wizard of Oz curtain here and grab a water. Who are you to come to the yellow brick road? There we go. I couldn't resist. It was always wanted to do that. Okay, chapter 17. This is where it gets really cool in my mind, okay? Hopefully we can get to the mark. If not, it'll be next week, of course. Let's begin reading in 17. Now he's going to tell you some things, and this is where it gets really good as far as self-interpretation goes, okay? Someone read chapter 17, 1 through 4. Well, you know, read 1 through 5. 1 through 5. Okay, let's stop right there. Notice she is the great prostitute or whore which sits over many waters. In verse 2, she sits over the whole earth. It's kind of self-interpretive, and to prove it, look at verse 15 and someone read that. It's self-interpretive. It's a book of signs. Okay? So sometimes he goes into great detail about what it means. But here is this woman. Remember we talked about 2 women from Proverbs, the virtuous woman and the strange woman, harlot. It's being personified again in Revelation. Now here you have the great whore, and then you have the Lamb's wife, which is a city called, there it is. Now this city, represented by a woman, is called Babylon. There you go. See, now we're putting pictures together. This is what it's about. It's not about Saddam Hussein in Iraq, any silly thing like that. It's a big picture view of the world system versus God's system, okay? Now, verse 3. Yeah, to the wilderness. Isn't that where that woman fled? Interesting. Keep reading.
There I saw a woman sitting on a red beast. It was covered with names against God written on it, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns.
Wow. So now the woman rides a beast, and there's 7. It's the same picture. Different facets of the same diamond. You see that? All pictured in different ways. The beast had 7 heads. Well, so did the dragon. Well, now the woman, it's all one and the same. Okay, go ahead.
The woman was dressed in purple and red and was shining with gold, precious jewels, and pearls she was wearing. She had a golden cup in her hand, a cup filled with evil things and the uncleanness of her sexual sin. On her forehead a title was written that was secret. This is what was written: The Great Babylon, mother of prostitutes, and of the evil things of the earth.
Now, that doesn't tell you what we're dealing with. This is clearly a picture of the world system domination by the dragon. Now, I find that an interesting translation, a sexual whatever. It's the Greek word's fornication, because this is spiritual. It's not physical. It's spiritual fornication. And we'll see that when we get to the 144,000 again in chapter 14. Okay, it's a picture of God's people that are not in bed with this woman. Okay, they're with the Lamb's wife. Okay, that's how you have to see this. Now, this woman, I'm going to tell you a secret, but then he lets it out of the bag. Shh, I have a secret. Remember the old Sesame? Hey, you want to buy some 9s? I got some 8s for me today. The mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. Wow, there it is. And with the martyrs of Jesus. And I wondered after her with great wonder. Whoa, what's going on? And the angel said to me, why did you marvel? I'm going to tell you the mystery of this woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay? So whatever's going on in 13, that beast has a rider. It's the great harlot. The city. It's Satan's bride. And it wars against the Lamb's bride. Okay? Verse 8, the beast that you saw was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition, and they that dwell on earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, look at this, and yet is. And here's the mind which has wisdom. 7 heads are 7 mountains. What's mountain in the Bible symbolize? Remember? A kingdom, power, authority. Okay? On which the woman sits. Now watch this. It gets even more better. And there are 7 kings. 5 have fallen. 1 is, that's 6. The other is not yet to come, that's 7. And when he comes, he'll continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7. That's the one that goes into perdition. And these 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but have received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Okay? Very interesting. Okay, so we're done. That clears it all up. Everybody, all your heads are like, well, I thought what's going on here? I didn't know what's going on. Did a terrible situation or whatever it is. We got. Okay, so here's where your handy-dandy notes from Brother Ed will help. Okay? Let's take a look at page 2, okay? That's why we're going to take our time. So in verses 3 and 4 here, we see a wounded head, of chapter 13. There is a wounded head. Make sure you understand, a wounded head, okay? The head was wounded. One of the heads of the dragon was wounded. But he came back to life, right? That's a very important point. Now in 17, we saw this woman and a beast over all nations. I think we get that that's how they affect us on earth. She seduces all, young and great, to follow her. Strange woman, harlot, folly, pictured as Babylon, all this stuff, right? Now, we're told of the mystery here in chapter 17. The beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, just like it described in chapter 13, verse 1, right? We all get that. Then we are told this beast of chapter 13 was, is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and goes into perdition. The whole earth wonders after the beast. And that's the match to chapter 13, verses 3 and 4. So far, so good. We see the same language, okay? Now here's where it gets interesting. In chapter 17, 9, and 10, the 7 heads are called what? You guys tell me. 7 mountains. But then they also are connected with what in verse 10? 7 kings. So heads, mountains, and kings are all used what? Interchangeably. And why is that? What are we talking about here? Power, authority. That's right. That's why. So 7 heads, 7 mountains, and 7 kings. Mountain equals power, authority, especially in the prophets. And that usually comes with a king. Here's what he says now. 5 of these kings has fallen, right? Now 1 is currently, whatever that means, but 1 is yet to come. So 5 plus 1 equals what? 7. But he says when this 7th one comes, it's only for a short time because he's wounded. And then another comes, and he's called the beast, who is the 8th, but is of the 7. Here's what that means to me. Right on your bold. Right here seems to me the issue of the wounded and then miraculously healed head of 13:3. He is the 8th, yes, but he's really the 7th one that was wounded and is back again. He was and is not in the wounded state, and then he shall come back. Now note well how the end of 17:8 reads. The beast was and is not, yet is. This yet is stated before he ever comes back, meaning evil is never really dead until it is finally defeated. Now 2 Thessalonians gives us a real good insight into this. Remember, he says that end won't come until there's a falling away, and this wicked power or person, whatever it is, comes, and he'll exalt himself. He goes, only right now there's something preventing him from coming until that something is taken out of the way, and then that entity will be revealed in all signs and lying wonders. Remember that? So that's the same way of saying the beast was, is not, yet is, but he's coming again. Does that make sense to you? Sort of? That's why I've given you handy-dandy notes from Brother Ed. You can go home and read these. So now notice carefully. Here's what gets even more interesting in chapter 17, verse 10 and 11. There are 7 kings, right? 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and he goes into perdition. So here, notice this, very important. One of the heads of the dragon is called the beast. One of the heads, not the entire dragon, but just one of the heads, which really represents an entire kingdom. Is it a head, a king, or a kingdom? The answer is yes. It's all of the above. It's one and the same. Note, the language is continually overlapping to prove a point. Satan is behind it all, no matter how it is manifested. In John's day, the beast was no doubt manifested as Rome. Because of this, many have tried to match the 10 horns with 10 historical Roman emperors in some fashion, give or take a few. That's understandable and of importance, and we'll look at this more in 17. However, the way I see the rest of the chapter unfolding points to something beyond Rome, just Rome of that day. So here's my take on this beast that was a head, that was a kingdom, however you want to describe that. Because we're in the last days, I'll call your attention to this highly technical chart over here. So in the last days began with the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, right? We're in them. They're going to culminate in the second coming. Then we enter the new heavens and new earth, okay? At this time, Rome was the dominant. That's kind of what Babylon was to Daniel, Rome was to John. That's what he sees. But this beast, I'm going to tell you, is Rome. But it becomes wounded. It is not. Rome was eventually defeated, really, by the church, if you've ever read history. We collapsed those dogs, man, by the light of Christ. And that, nevermore were they to dominate that way. Now, they remorphed into what they called the so-called Holy Roman Empire, which was the Roman Catholic entity of a church. And we know the treachery that was there also. But that also went down the tube, so to say, as far as world domination goes. Correct? So the beast was Rome of John's day. The beast is not. It was defeated eventually. But this beast will ascend out of the bottomless pit again one day. Right now it's being prevented from coming out in all dominance until. Now let's go to 2 Thessalonians now and look at it. Okay? There's something going on. Remember, he said, yet is, but he is not, but yet is. And that's what 2 Thessalonians tells us. Somebody read, just start in verse 1. Well, oh boy, that's a lot to bite off. Verse 3 says, let no man deceive, 2 Thessalonians 1. Excuse me, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for the day of Christ shall not come except there come a falling away first. A man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. We saw where the beast went into perdition. Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits in the temple of God as God. The temple of God in Paul's writing is always the body of Christ. Remember not when I told you these things? And now, verse 6 is key. And now you know what is holding him back, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity is already at work. The beast is not, yet is, see? Only he who is now preventing it is going to keep preventing it until he is taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked one or all wickedness be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders, deceiving those who do not receive the gospel. That seems to me a perfect fit to what we're reading here in Revelation. The beast was, is not, and will ascend. So we're in that place right now where he is not, so to say, but the mystery of iniquity is working hard, man. One day, it's going to be a boom that's going to be unleashed. Okay? Yeah. This is a great point. Go ahead. Yeah, this is a great point. I'm working toward that end. It's on the notes. Because this view, understanding how the last days functions, will help make this applicable to any situation where a beast of sorts is manifest. Okay? That's why many people during World War II thought Hitler was the Antichrist. Of course, they used a numeral name value and got the 666 for him, just like Ronald Wilson Reagan. We're going to cover that, okay, in just a minute. But this is a very important point. Let's read on here. Let's not miss a very important point here is worship. Okay? In chapter 13, the dragon wants worship, right? And that's what he has craved since the beginning. How does he get worship? Through state governments. The state is now God, not God. So when he rules over a kingdom, a planet, a nation, whatever it is, that's how he'll receive it. Okay? And so let's just skip over here to, let me see. Let's see. I've talked about the 3.5 years enough. I think we get that. It's the time frame used, whether it's literal or figurative, to describe God's people being persecuted by the enemy, no matter the time frame. It's half of a 7, which is God's perfect number, and that means that will fall short. God's people will win in the end. Just like the ministry of Christ was 3.5 years, our ministry is 3.5 years. Let's skip over to in light of Janet's question, page 5. I'm just going to drop this in there because we'll work in there. Here's some of the, man, where's my, I had those very notes. Wait a second here. If you look at some of the, right in the middle of page 5, here's, I have a little bullet point in the middle of some of the people put forth of the number, the beast guy and the kingdom. Nero Caesar, Hebrew letters, supposedly that's 666. Popes of Rome, of course, all the way through the, I mean, Martin Luther addressed the Pope as your hellishness, called him the Antichrist, you know. Napoleon, Hitler, JFK, Bill Gates, the barcode system. Of course, it has 18 lines, a 666, you know how it goes. Ronald Wilt, there's 6 letters in each of that. And Mikhail Gorbachev. See? And so what happens in relation to Janet's question, when the pure historical view of Revelation, because this is the last days, which is a figurative view of 3.5 years, so they would be able to allow for any time this beast is manifested in some horrific fashion through communist dictatorships, through Hitler, stuff like that, they would allow for that to be present. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. I'm saying that I'm allowing for an all-out end-time assault because this beast, we don't, you know, we always whine and complain about America and stuff, kind of like Tim was saying, but you know what? We are not even close to the decadence of the way Rome was in the days of when they were persecuting, feeding Christians to the lions and all that. We're not even that close. So we're not at that end time where there's going to be this huge revelation of stuff like that. We're still, it could happen at any time. I realize that. But right now, let me show you something on the back. Look at your back page here in the end. It's going to get a lot worse is what I'm saying. What does that black box say there? What does that say? Yeah, imagine if our view of the end times was centered on preparing for Christ rather than an Antichrist, centered on the mark of the Lamb rather than the mark of the beast, centered on preparing for redeeming the earth rather than escaping it, and centered on hope rather than fear. How about that one? And I might add, selling a bunch of prophecy books. I'm just saying. Okay? So, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, notice the language. Was, is not, and will come again. That's almost identical to Revelation 1, where he talks about the Lamb in God. I fear not, I am he that lives, was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. That threefold thing. That's kind of the way the Scripture are describing Babylon, and its pictures of beast when it comes again. So it was, I think it was Rome, is not, Rome was eventually defeated, but will come again. That end power, whatever it may be, and it's already, the mystery of iniquity is already at work. Again, having this proper last days concept of having begun at Calvary and the resurrection, taking us to the end, allows for this. Remember, that was Rome in John's day. It finally was defeated. But again, you're going to have an end-time manifestation of an all-out assault again, the way I see things. Okay? And that brings us to the mark. Ooh. The page I was looking for Janet, I just found. It wasn't 5, it was 4. Take a look here. It actually sets up this discussion on the mark quite well in my humbly opinion. This is that great section where so many people have tried to figure it all out, and to me it's kind of I'm just saying what I think, okay? We're going back to chapter 13, excuse me. Yeah. And on page 4 on your handy-dandy notes from Brother Ed. Revelation 13, verse 14. We'll have to backtrack. We're going to see this false prophet come up over and over again of verse 11 and so forth. He's exercising all the power of the first beast, all the power, same clowns, same show, same circus. Okay, that's what you need to know there. He brings fire down from heaven. These are all pictures, okay, pictures of spiritual battle, as we've talked about. And in verse 14, he deceives them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to all them that dwell on earth that they should make an image to the beast that had a wound by a sword and did live. Okay? He had power to give life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, and so forth. Here's the key right here. He causes all, both small and great, rich, poor, free, bond, to receive a mark in their right hand and in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save that he had the mark of the beast or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, or depending on your translation, it is man's number, and his number is 666. There it is. That's the biggie. And guess what's right around the corner? Halloween. Whoa. All right, so in relation to Janet's good observation earlier, let's look at our notes, okay? First of all, we have to understand, we've covered this issue of a mark at length in chapter 7, okay? And the reason why I wanted to read the back of the page first is because ere before a mark of the beast was ever talked about, the mark of God is the first mark ever discussed in Holy Scriptures. And that goes back as early as Ezekiel 9. The mark was in the foreheads. Folks, I'm sorry, it's not literal, it's spiritual. And I think we've proven that at length. But we're going to do it again, okay? On your notes, in verses 14 through 18, when we began to comment on a concept of a mark back as early as chapter 3, verse 12 in Revelation, Jesus said, when you overcome, you're going to get the name of my God on your forehead. Okay? So much attention has been given to the famed mark of the beast that the historical meaning of a mark in Scripture has been clouded. Not only that, it forgets that there has to be some relevance to John's day and who he was writing to. He's not thinking about a bunch of future guys with some barcode getting stamped on their forehead. That's just silly. That's newspaper headline theology, is what that is. Okay? So I'm going to ask you to refer to our notes in chapter 7. Ezekiel 9, the mark was placed on God's people before the judgment on the ungodly. And that's how this ship began too. We get sealed and marked when we are saved, and no matter what the Christian goes through, they may kill my body, but as Jesus said, fear him who can kill both body and soul in hellfire. That's who you need to fear, okay? So that's why John, it's so applicable, because when they already had the mark of God on their foreheads in chapter 7. It's the same people in chapter 22 praising God. And what's the significance of the forehead? Let's see if we remember that. Yeah, it's the mind, brain, heart reality, our vital core. We are either sealed of God or the dragon at our vital core. Everybody has a mark, is what I'm saying. Just depends on what kingdom you're in. That's what John's describing. It's the picture he's presenting. The right hand in Scripture is a picture of strength, power, and salvation. I gave you a ton of scriptures there to look at. So both the scriptures of forehead and right hand are indicative of the governing power in one's life. We are marked as either saved or lost. That's it. And of course, we've gone over this in detail. That's who the 144,000 are. It's us. It's the true Israel of God for all time, both Old Covenant and New Covenant saints. We're the ones that have the seal. Now, with all this, in relation to Janet's question, if you look at page 4 in your notes, one can readily see that whenever the world system is in strong domination, that true believers indeed may have trouble buying, selling, and having little or no freedom to worship. That's just not about some future time on the world. We got to consider John and pagans Rome's day. Remember the difficult situation of the seven. Were these guys free? No. They had to secretly run their businesses and secretly do this. And if they didn't take the mark of that beast at that time, emperor worship, what happened to them? Off with their heads. And that's why he would tell John, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord. That's what he's saying. Again, remember the past, present, future view of the book. We can't just make it totally future. You can't just make it totally past. It's all of the above. So when in our days, Janet, if you look here, consider John's day in pagan Rome, martyrs were all too frequent. It was the same with Catholic Rome when they were killing true believers for their faith. The same was true of Nazi Germany. The same was true of communist nations and various dictatorships. And even today, our brothers and sisters are dying at the hands of the beast, of the dragon. Why? Because they refused his mark. The state is God is the driving theme in all of this. And this is the stealth way the dragon receives worship, if you will. And he's not even upfront about that. Right? So all that makes sense to you? So that's why in verse 18 he said, here is wisdom, here is understanding about who this number and this situation is. Okay? So look at your notes on page 5. Here is wisdom. This isn't in an intellectual sense at all. It's a spiritual sense because we've now arrived at the famed and feared number all through the ages of 666. When we consider all the book has presented thus far and all of its signifying, it's a sign book with good and evil, heaven and earth, New Jerusalem, Babylon, the harlot, the virtuous woman, stars, scorpions, angels, all these things. We should have an advantage now with the number 666 that is presented. Wouldn't you say? I would think so. Notice how the sentence reads. The number of the beast is the number of a man. How many versions here say it is man's number? Anybody? Anybody? Got one? Two? Three? Got one twice. Got one. Do we have five? Do we have six? Well, both are correct. Let me say, I'll tell you that in just a minute, okay? It is the phrase, the number of a man, that has led many to believe it to be a singular and particular person at one point. Centuries old is the practice of assigning numerical values to letters. The most modern example would be the Roman numerals. What Super Bowl's coming up? Does anybody know? LVII. 57. I always know the Super Bowl because it's the same age I am every year, right? So I'm going to be 57 in November, so I know February's Super Bowl is Super Bowl 57. Yeah. Right? So, in light of this, how many speculations have come as to who this 666 individual may be? And, now I have stuff I could bring. I didn't bring them today, but I could give you all kinds of formulas. There's all kinds of languages and formulas to use. And as we looked at earlier, here's some of the samples of who this Antichrist would be. Nero Caesar, we looked at it, popes of Rome, Napoleon. Who else have you guys heard about? Anybody that I mean, there's a list, yeah?
My uncle, who was a man, my uncle had power in this country and started spouting that Obama was the Antichrist. But because my uncle was a man with power,
Yeah.
I had to go to power and advise that he was doing this. I don't know what he could do with this because he was a man with power.
Yeah, got it, right. How about that? Yeah, well, I've heard it all, man. I mean, here's the deal. As you can see, there's been so many matches through the years. Maybe this view of a number for a letter name identity is rightfully questioned. Maybe that's the case. Okay? Is there another way to look at this then? Well, sure there is. Sure there is. It's a mind that requires wisdom and understanding. Now, to understand 666, haven't we looked at all the numbers in Revelation? Isn't that a numerically based book? What's the number 12? You remember? Always and forever, the number for God's people. Yeah, the little, remember, here's the church, here's the steeple, there's the little God's people. God, that's only 10. Well, that's the 10 northern tribes that became the true Israel, George Armstrong's Church of the Worldwide God. Anyway, so 12 is always a number for God's people. 12 tribes. Then you had 12 apostles. 12 to 10 is 24. That's your 24 elders. 12 times 12 is 144. There's your city. See, it's all there, man. You just got to think biblically. That's all, right? 4 is the number of earth. That's correct. 3 is also God's number. 6 is the number of man. And 7 is the number of God. Perfection. That's right. So here 666 is tripled. It's to the third power. It's kind of like verses 777. Okay? That's how you got to look at this thing. Okay? In other words, 6 falls short of 7, or rather, God's glory. It's a common thought in Jewish thought, for example, this kind of thinking. This is nothing new. Okay? Why it's tripled is you got to go back to verse 17. Look at 13:17. There's 3 things. No man might buy or sell except he had the mark, the name, or the number of, that's 3. Okay? So there, it's to the third power, 666. Name, number, mark. Okay? It's to the third power. Also by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every matter is established. Correct? So it's 666 is opposed to 777, if you will. 777 would be the epitome of God, righteousness, and perfection. It is realized through the redemptive work of the Lamb and the Spirit. It is manifested as the city of God, New Jerusalem, with His sealed people. We've seen this all through the book, have we not? Okay. Thus, with 666, we're looking at the epitome of man, sin, and falling short of such perfection. This is manifested also as an entire system on earth, coming with a mark, a ruler, and a number name. And that system is Babylon, who is the dragon and his people. Moreover, this is the first time we hear anything about his name. Well, let me ask you a question. Who is the beast? We have seen interchangeable language, haven't we? The dragon in chapter 12 was called the serpent, who was called the beast, who was called the accuser. Right. So describe it however you will, make it manifested as whatever you will. A king, a kingdom, a system. The source is one and the same. Satan. And that's truly his name, if you will. His name means adversary. And that about sums it all up. Wouldn't you say adversary? With this understanding from above, the phrase number of a man is the same as saying it is man's number. Let me show you this, even from the versions that translate a man. Okay? And that's what I believe it means. It's man's number. Okay? Now, it may be some individual. I'm not going to ever say that. It's not possible or anything like that. But we're looking at something different here. Okay? So, let's look at chapter 21 of Revelation. Let's see this use of the English language, okay? This is verse with verse comparison. Now, I'm an old King James dude. I use that. It's just familiar to me. It's, whatever. Okay? And so I compare verses with verses. Chapter 21, verse 17. Look what it says. And he measured the wall of the city, that's New Jerusalem, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man. Now, is he saying here this is one man, he's only using the measurement of one in particular individual? Or is the meaning it's man's measurement? Just like the number of a man can mean it's man's number. It's the same in Deuteronomy 3:11. We don't have time to go there, but they're measuring King Og of Bashan. That's an incredible name. What's your name? Og of Bashan. That is not a bad band name, by the way. Og of Bashan Live. Fellowship Church, October 12th. No. So, when they describe it, when they're measuring this cubit and that cubit, he said it's the cubit of a man, or a man's cubit. In Galatians 3, he talks about a man's covenant. This isn't pointing out how men, this is pointing out how men do covenants, not the covenant of one particular individual. Nevertheless, some version actually translates this as a human measurement or a human covenant. And in Revelation 13, as man's number. And the reason why, folks, we're going to get a little technical here. I hope you don't mind, but I think you're used to me now. This little word here, this little letter, that's called an indefinite article in English. In Greek, that doesn't exist. So literally, it reads man's number. There's no A there. Now, lest you say, now don't try and pull that jazz, preacher, I'm not. I'm not suggesting this indefinite article was added to try and change any meaning at all, for it's clear from these other passages there's a different way to read the sentence. It's just the way an English works, right? Granted then, and here I'll conclude, it's no fault that the phrase can be read as pertaining to a man as it is translated in some versions. No doubt about that. But that does not negate the reality of it meaning man's number either, because we've seen that too with the same wording used in other verses. A cubit of a man, the covenant of a man. Doesn't mean one particular individual. It means man's way of measuring, man's number. Okay? So, isn't that the point ultimately? That these aren't salvation matters? And our obligation, we have to have grace and mercy and love to one another as we work through this. I think it's a blast and a blessing that we can take our time like we do and go through it like this. How many people have ever looked at it this way? You've just all heard, hey, some guy's coming up. His name's, who was that dude in the Left Behind series? All those goofy movies, some guy, I don't know. So, there's another way to look at it, and I believe that's why else would he say, here's wisdom and understanding to John, who sees another sign in heaven shortly after this. Okay? It would have to have some relevance, folks. Now, I understand the Rome-only group, they try to make it certain emperors and thises and that's. But again, when you have this past-present view, it can apply down the line. And you can allow for, let's put it this way. If we're still here, and some dude rises up on the world stage and starts saying he's God, I think we have a little bit of a clue about what's going on. You know what I mean? It's not like we're going to miss the train, folks. Jesus said in another place, if it were possible to deceive the elect, and it won't be. That's why he says that. This is how strong this delusion is going to be. And if it were possible, that's how strong it is. So we don't have to worry about getting hoodwinked by the Antichrist. I'm just saying. The way I read my Bible is God has not given me the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I got a biblical mind. Paul says we have the mind of Christ, 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And if I get my head in this book and just do some basic stuff like this, I'm going to be okay. And so are you. Does that make sense to you? We're going to be okay, man. Hey, guess what? We win. End of game spoiler. We win, man. And that's why I always joke I'm a pan-millennial. When it all pans out, it's going to be okay, man. Pray the Lord. Pray the Lord. All right, it is 10:45. That is right on the spot. Johnny on the spot. So think about some things. We'll bring the notes next week. And if we're able to, we'll go ahead and start 14 and 15. 14 and 15 answer back to 12 and 13. It's a hard pushback of the redeemed, because the Lord's about fixing to blow the whistle and call everybody out the pool. That's what's coming down the pipe. All right, we're done.